Emma, a hard-working employee with dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, has her world turned upside down when her boss, Trevor, shamelessly steals her groundbreaking work and uses it to claim a promotion she rightfully deserved. But Emma isn't one to back down. Fueled by betrayal and injustice, she embarks on a secret mission to expose Trevor's lies, unravel his dirty tactics, and take him down once and for all. What begins as a calculated plan to gather evidence spirals into a shocking chain of events involving blackmail, secret alliances, and a dramatic showdown that could destroy Emma's career, or solidify her as the ultimate victor. As Emma fights to reclaim her future, she learns that revenge is a game of strategy and nerve, where one wrong move could change everything. In this gripping tale of betrayal, justice, and scandal, the lines between revenge and survival blur, leading to an explosive and unexpected ending you won't see coming. Will Emma rise above the deceit, or will Trevor's final move bring her crashing down? I always believed that hard work paid off. It was a lesson my dad drilled into me growing up. He'd say, if you're the first one in the office and the last one out, they'll notice. You just have to be patient. That was my mantra, my guiding star, until I met Trevor. Trevor was my boss at a mid-sized marketing firm I'd been working at for 2 years. To say he was uninspiring would be an understatement. He'd breeze into the office late, leave early, and spend most of his day delegating his responsibilities to the rest of us. He wasn't exactly cruel, just absent. He didn't care to know our names, let alone what we were working on. But I didn't let it bother me too much. I wasn't working for Trevor's approval, I was working for my future. From the moment I started, I'd had my eye on the senior analyst position. It was the next big step in my career, and I was determined to get it. I worked hard, took on extra assignments, and volunteered for the projects no one else wanted. I thought I was playing it smart. Trevor even hinted a few times that the position was mine for the taking. Just keep doing what you're doing, he said once, barely looking up from his phone. I'll put in a good word when the time comes. I should have known better. Everything changed when Trevor handed me the luxury car account. It was our firm's biggest client, and their rebranding strategy would be the crown jewel of any portfolio. When he assigned it to me, I felt a surge of pride. This was it, the moment I'd been working for. Don't screw this up, Trevor said, handing me the brief. He didn't even bother to explain the client's needs. That was his way, dump the work on someone else and take the credit later. But I didn't care. I was thrilled to prove myself. For weeks, I poured everything I had into that presentation. I lived and breathed that project. Late nights, weekends, skipped dinners with friends, it didn't matter. I was laser-focused. I analyzed the client's market, dissected their competitors' strategies, and developed a pitch that I knew would blow them away. It was innovative, sleek, and perfectly tailored to their brand. Even when the stress started to get to me, I reminded myself why I was doing this. The senior analyst position was just on the horizon, and this project would seal the deal. I even started daydreaming about how I'd decorate my new office, a small but comfortable space with a view, far away from the open-plan chaos of the junior team. The night before the client meeting, I stayed at the office until nearly 2 a.m., putting the finishing touches on my slides. By the time I left, I was exhausted but proud. This was the best work I'd ever done, and I couldn't wait to see the client's reaction. The next morning, I arrived early to the boardroom, nervous but excited. I'd even worn my lucky blazer. Trevor sauntered in a few minutes before the meeting started, carrying nothing but his phone and a cup of coffee. Typical. I figured he'd introduce me to the client and then let me take the reins. But as soon as the meeting began, something felt off. Trevor stood up and started speaking. "We're excited to present our rebranding strategy for your company," he said, clicking to the first slide of my presentation. I froze. My stomach churned as he continued talking, slide after slide, delivering my pitch word for word. I glanced around the room, hoping someone would notice. But the client seemed impressed. They nodded along enthusiastically, asking questions that Trevor answered like he'd spent the last month working on the project himself. My co-workers, who knew I'd been burning the midnight oil on this, stayed silent, their eyes glued to their notepads. When Trevor finished, the room erupted in applause. The client shook his hand, thanking him for such a brilliant and comprehensive strategy. My chest tightened. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Trevor didn't just take credit for my work, he acted like I didn't even exist. After the meeting, Trevor clapped me on the back. "Great job on the prep work," he said casually. Prep work? I'd created the entire strategy from scratch. My hands clenched into fists, but I forced a smile. Now wasn't the time to explode. I needed to think. 2 weeks later, the senior analyst position was announced. I walked into the office that morning feeling cautiously optimistic. Despite what had happened in the boardroom, I knew my work spoke for itself. And Trevor, for all his flaws, had told me repeatedly that I was in line for the promotion. Then I saw the email. It wasn't me. The position went to someone named Brad, a guy I'd only met once, briefly, during a holiday party. He wasn't even part of the marketing department. Turns out, Brad was one of Trevor's old fraternity brothers. He didn't have the experience, the qualifications, or the work ethic, but none of that mattered. He had Trevor. I sat at my desk, staring at the screen as my coworkers murmured their congratulations to Brad. My hands shook. My throat tightened. I couldn't focus on anything but the rage building inside me. Trevor had robbed me. He hadn't just stolen my promotion, he'd stolen my work, my recognition, and my future. That night, I went home and cried. Not because I was sad, but because I felt powerless. I'd done everything right, everything I was supposed to do, and it still wasn't enough. I spent hours lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should just quit. But the thought of Trevor getting away with what he'd done, of him laughing with Brad over drinks while I quietly slinked away. I couldn't stomach it. That's when I made my decision. If Trevor wanted to play dirty, so could I. I wasn't going to let him win. I was going to get my revenge, and I was going to do it in a way he'd never see coming. The morning after I made my decision, I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was as if all the hurt and frustration had burned away, leaving nothing but cold determination. Trevor thought he was untouchable. He thought he could take whatever he wanted, toss the scraps to the rest of us, and no one would dare challenge him. He was wrong. I didn't storm into his office demanding justice, as much as I wanted to. No, this required patience, strategy, and precision, just like any marketing campaign. Trevor had shown me how ruthless the corporate world could be. Now, I was going to use everything I'd learned to take him down. Step 1, gather evidence. For the next few weeks, I became an observer, quietly lurking in the shadows. Every email, every conversation, every little slip Trevor made, I documented it all. I started forwarding myself copies of his emails, highlighting instances where he assigned work to me or others, only to later claim it as his own. I didn't delete the emails from his sent folder. I wanted to make sure there were no traces of tampering, so if anyone checked, everything would match up. I also started recording our team meetings on my phone, tucked discreetly under my notebook. At first, it felt wrong, but then I'd remind myself of what he'd done, what he'd stolen. The recordings showed a clear pattern. Whenever someone brought up a good idea, Trevor would nod thoughtfully, saying something vague like, "Interesting, let me think about that." Then, within a week, he'd pitch the same idea to upper management as if it were his. I wasn't the only one he did this to either. My coworker Sarah had been trying to implement a new digital marketing tool for months, only for Trevor to brush her off. But when the CEO mentioned wanting more efficiency in our analytics, Trevor suddenly proposed Sarah's idea as a solution. He didn't even change the wording. Sarah was furious, but like the rest of us, she felt stuck. Speaking out against Trevor felt pointless. He was too ingrained in the company's hierarchy, too buddy-buddy with upper management. But I wasn't just collecting evidence for myself, I was building a case for all of us. Step 2, track his mistakes. As much as Trevor liked to take credit for other people's work, he wasn't particularly detail-oriented. I started noticing small cracks in his facade, mistakes that, if exposed, could cause real damage. For example, I discovered he'd fudged some numbers in a quarterly report to make our team's performance look better than it actually was. It wasn't a huge discrepancy, but it was enough to raise questions if the right people saw it. Then there were the client relationships. Trevor didn't bother maintaining them. Once a project was handed off, he disappeared, leaving the rest of us to pick up the slack. I started reaching out to our clients directly, framing it as a courtesy check-in. Most of them were thrilled to hear from me and surprised that Trevor wasn't more involved. One client, the luxury car brand, even mentioned how they'd been expecting follow-ups on the rebranding strategy but hadn't heard a word from Trevor since the big meeting. I jumped on the opportunity, offering to handle all future communications personally. They agreed without hesitation. By the end of the week, I'd positioned myself as their go-to contact, effectively cutting Trevor out of the loop. Step 3, connect with allies. Taking Trevor down was too big a task to handle alone. I needed allies, people who'd been burned by him and were willing to speak up when the time came. It wasn't hard to find them. Almost everyone on the team had a story about Trevor stealing their work or undermining their efforts. I started having quiet conversations over coffee breaks and after-work drinks. I didn't push too hard, just asked a few open-ended questions and let people vent. Most of them were hesitant at first, afraid of retaliation. But as I shared my own experiences, they opened up. It turns out, I wasn't the only one who'd been passed over for a promotion because of Trevor's favoritism. Sarah, for one, was furious when I told her about the emails and recordings I'd collected. I knew he was shady, but this is next level, she said. What are you planning to do with all this? Expose him, I said simply. But I can't do it alone. If we're going to take him down, we need to do it together. It didn't take much convincing. Sarah was all in, and soon, a few others joined us. We started meeting in secret, sharing our stories and pooling our evidence. Trevor had built his career on the backs of people like us, and now, we were ready to fight back. Step 4, strike when the time is right. The perfect opportunity came sooner than I expected. The CEO announced an upcoming company-wide performance review, a rare chance for every department to showcase their achievements over the past year. Trevor, of course, saw it as an opportunity to grandstand. He called a team meeting, assigning us all tasks to prepare for his presentation. I couldn't help but smile as he laid out his plans. He had no idea that everything he was about to present would be scrutinized, by HR, by the board, and by the very clients he'd been neglecting. In the weeks leading up to the review, I doubled down on my preparations. I submitted my anonymous report to HR, detailing Trevor's misconduct and attaching all the evidence I'd gathered. To ensure it wouldn't be ignored, I made sure to emphasize how his actions were putting the company at risk, falsified reports, mishandled clients, and growing dissatisfaction among his team. At the same time, I quietly tipped off the luxury car brand, letting them know their concerns about Trevor's lack of follow-up had been noted. They were polite but firm in their response. They expected to see me at the upcoming review, not Trevor. That was all the confirmation I needed. The night before the review, Trevor stayed late at the office, a rare occurrence for him. I watched from my desk as he worked on his presentation, blissfully unaware of the storm heading his way. As I packed up to leave, he looked up and smirked. "Big day tomorrow," he said. "Try not to mess anything up." I just smiled back. "Don't worry, Trevor. I've got everything under control." The day of the performance review arrived, and the office buzzed with nervous energy. For most people, this was a chance to showcase their work and make a good impression. For Trevor, it was his moment to shine, or so he thought. For me, it was the moment I'd been waiting for. The conference room was packed with employees, senior managers, and the CEO himself sitting at the head of the table. Each department head was scheduled to present, outlining their team's achievements over the past year. Trevor, as our department manager, was up second. As we waited for the meeting to begin, Trevor leaned back in his chair, radiating confidence. He had no notes, no laptop, just his signature cocky smirk. I, on the other hand, was calm and collected. I'd already done my part. The pieces were in motion, and all I had to do now was watch. The first department head presented without incident, and then it was Trevor's turn. He stood up, adjusted his tie, and strode to the front of the room. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "I'm excited to share the incredible progress our team has made this year. We've secured major wins, developed innovative strategies, and exceeded client expectations across the board." His presentation started smoothly enough. He began with a general overview of the department's accomplishments, peppering in just enough buzzwords to sound impressive. But as he moved to the specifics, something shifted. He clicked to the next slide, and I saw the familiar graphics from the luxury car brand's rebranding strategy, the presentation I had created. Trevor was all smiles as he began describing the campaign in detail, taking full credit for the work. But then, the CEO interrupted. "Wait a second," he said, holding up a hand. "Didn't I get an email from the client specifically praising one of your team members for this project? Who was it again?" The room went silent. My heart pounded in my chest, but I kept my face neutral. Trevor froze, clearly caught off guard. "Oh, he stammered. "That must have been a misunderstanding. It was a team effort." The CEO frowned. "I don't think so. I remember the client mentioning someone by name." He scanned the room until his eyes landed on me. "Ah, there she is. Emma, wasn't it? They said you'd been handling all the follow-ups." I straightened in my chair, feeling every set of eyes in the room on me. "Yes, that's correct," I said, my voice steady. "I've been working closely with the client since the initial presentation to ensure their needs are met." Trevor's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but the CEO cut him off. "Interesting. Trevor, why wasn't Emma listed as the lead on this project?" There it was, the opening I'd been waiting for. Before Trevor could dig himself any deeper, I spoke up. "Actually, sir, there's been some confusion regarding project credits across the department. I'd be happy to clarify if you'd like." The CEO nodded. "Please do." I stood up, my hands steadied despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Thank you. Over the past year, our team has worked on several high-profile campaigns. While Trevor has done a great job representing our department, it's important to acknowledge the contributions of individual team members. For instance, the rebranding strategy for the luxury car brand was a project I led from start to finish." I clicked to the next slide, the original, unedited version of my presentation, complete with timestamps showing when I'd created each slide. Here's the original draft of the strategy, which I submitted to Trevor weeks before the client meeting. As you can see, every element was developed in-house. I could feel Trevor glaring at me, but I ignored him. This wasn't about him anymore, it was about setting the record straight. The CEO leaned forward, studying the screen. "And what about the follow-ups?" The client seemed very impressed with the ongoing support. "I've been managing that personally," I said. "I noticed early on that there were gaps in communication, so I took the initiative to step in. The client has been very receptive, and I believe our relationship with them has strengthened as a result." The CEO nodded, clearly impressed. "Thank you, Emma. This is exactly the kind of leadership we need more of in this company." I sat down, my heart still racing. Trevor, meanwhile, looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. But the worst, or best, depending on how you looked at it, was yet to come. As Trevor stumbled through the rest of his presentation, he tried to pivot to other projects, but the questions from the CEO and other senior managers kept coming. They wanted to know who had really done the work, who had handled the details, and who had been responsible for the results. Time and time again, it became clear that Trevor had been taking credit for his team's efforts while contributing little of his own. When he finally finished, the room was buzzing with whispers. Trevor returned to his seat, his face flushed, and avoided eye contact with anyone. But the real blow came during the next break. The HR director approached the CEO, whispering something in his ear. He nodded, his expression darkening, and then motioned for Trevor to join them in the hallway. I didn't need to hear what they were saying to know what was happening. The anonymous report I'd submitted had done its job. Trevor didn't return to the conference room after the break. By the end of the day, an all-company email was sent out, announcing Trevor's resignation effective immediately. The wording was vague, but the message was clear to those of us who knew the truth: Trevor had been caught, and he wouldn't be coming back. As for me, the fallout wasn't over yet. Later that afternoon, the CEO called me into his office. He thanked me for stepping up and handling the situation with professionalism. "We need more people like you in leadership roles," he said. "I'd like to talk to you about your future with the company." I smiled politely, but inside, I already knew my answer. My future wasn't here, not anymore. I'd achieved what I set out to do, Trevor was gone, and justice had been served. Now, it was time to move on. As I left the CEO's office, I felt a mix of triumph and exhaustion. Trevor was gone, and I'd finally received the recognition I deserved. Yet, there was a nagging voice in the back of my mind telling me this wasn't over. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone like Trevor wouldn't go down quietly. But I brushed it off. Justice had been served, or so I thought. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. With Trevor gone, the team dynamics changed dramatically. People were finally speaking up in meetings, and the toxic tension that had hung over the department seemed to evaporate. I focused on wrapping up my projects while preparing for my exit. I'd already started interviewing with other companies, and it was only a matter of time before I moved on to something better. Then, the bombshell dropped. It was a Friday afternoon when the email arrived. The subject line simply read, "Urgent, confidential HR matter." My stomach churned as I clicked it open. The email wasn't from our HR department, though. It was from a burner email address. The message read, "Emma, I know what you did. You think you've won, but it's not over yet. Check your inbox in exactly 1 hour. You'll see what I mean." My hands trembled as I reread the email. Was this a prank? A disgruntled coworker? Or Trevor? I couldn't be sure, but the mention of "what you did" made my chest tighten. I'd been careful, meticulous, even, about covering my tracks. There was no way anyone could trace the anonymous report to me. Right? I spent the next hour in a haze of anxiety, watching the clock tick down. Exactly 60 minutes later, another email landed in my inbox. This one had no text, just an attachment. I hesitated for a moment before opening it. The document was a detailed dossier on me. It included screenshots of emails I'd forwarded to myself, recordings of meetings, and even private messages I'd sent to Sarah and the others who'd helped me gather evidence against Trevor. My heart sank as I realized what this meant. Someone had been watching me the entire time. And then, at the very bottom of the file, was the real kicker, a screenshot of a draft email I'd never sent. It was a fiery resignation letter I'd written in the heat of frustration months ago, where I vented about the company, the leadership, and even the CEO himself. I'd saved it in my personal folder as a way to blow off steam, never intending to send it. But somehow, whoever this was had gotten hold of it. A third email arrived minutes later. You're not as smart as you think you are. I have everything I need to ruin you. I wonder what the CEO would think of that little resignation letter. Or HR, for that matter. If you want to keep your reputation intact, meet me at the Green Lantern Bar tonight at 8. Alone. Don't bother trying to trace this email, I'm already 10 steps ahead of you. My mind raced. I considered deleting the email and pretending it never happened, but I knew that wouldn't work. Whoever this was had the upper hand, and if they went public with what they had, my career could be destroyed. The only way forward was to face them head-on. At 8 p.m. sharp, I walked into the Green Lantern Bar, my heart pounding. It was a dimly lit, run-down place, not the kind of spot I'd ever choose to meet someone. I scanned the room, looking for anyone familiar. Then, in the far corner, I saw him. Trevor. He was sitting at a small table, nursing a whiskey, his face a mixture of smugness and rage. I swallowed hard and approached him, my palms slick with sweat. "So, it's you," I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. He smirked. "Of course it's me. Did you really think you could stab me in the back and get away with it?" "You did this to yourself, Trevor," I snapped. "You lied, you stole, and you got caught. I didn't do anything you didn't deserve." He leaned back in his chair, studying me. "Maybe. But here's the thing, Emma, I'm not going down alone. I've got dirt on you, too. Enough to make sure you never work in this industry again." My heart raced. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed copies of the same files I'd seen in the email. "I've been watching you for months. You're good, I'll give you that. But you made a mistake, several, actually. And now, I've got all the proof I need to burn you." I clenched my fists, refusing to let him see how rattled I was. "What do you want, Trevor?" He took a slow sip of his drink before answering. "Simple. I want my job back. You're going to email HR and the CEO, telling them you made a mistake, that the report you submitted was inaccurate. You're going to say you were coerced by other team members who wanted me gone. And you're going to recommend that I be reinstated immediately." I stared at him, my stomach twisting in knots. "And if I refuse?" He smiled, leaning in close. "Then I send everything to the CEO. The resignation letter, the recordings, the emails, you'll be lucky to get a job flipping burgers after this." I sat there, stunned. Trevor had backed me into a corner, and he knew it. But as I stared at his smug face, something inside me shifted. I realized that this wasn't just about my career anymore, it was about standing up to the kind of person who thought he could bully and blackmail his way through life. "You know what, Trevor?" I said, standing up. "Go ahead. Send it all." His smirk faltered. "What?" "You heard me," I said, my voice icy. "Send it. I'll happily explain everything to the CEO. Yes, I forwarded emails and recorded meetings, but I did it to expose a toxic manager who was stealing from his team and falsifying reports. You think they'll fire me for that? Maybe. But you'll never work again." Trevor's face darkened, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in his eyes. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I leaned in, matching his earlier confidence. "Let's see who they believe, the employee who worked tirelessly for this company, or the disgraced manager who was forced to resign under a cloud of suspicion." He didn't respond, his jaw tightening. I straightened, grabbing my bag. "Enjoy your drink, Trevor. Oh, and one more thing, if you so much as breathe a word about this to anyone, I'll make sure every client and competitor in the industry knows exactly who you are and what you've done. Good luck finding work after that." I turned and walked out of the bar, my heart pounding but my head held high. For the first time in weeks, I felt truly free. Trevor might have thought he had me cornered, but in the end, he was just another bully, and I wasn't afraid of him anymore. The next morning, I submitted my resignation. I didn't wait for the CEO to respond or for Trevor to make another move. I was done with the company, with the drama, with all of it. I had bigger plans now, ones that didn't involve looking over my shoulder. 2 weeks later, I started my new job at a competitor's firm. On my first day, I got a call from a former coworker. "Did you hear?" she asked, her voice buzzing with excitement. Trevor tried to get hired at another agency, but they did a reference check. Apparently, our CEO personally told them he was blacklisted from the industry. I smiled, a wave of satisfaction washing over me. Trevor was finally gone for good. As for me, I was just getting started.